The following is a presentation of the Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
From the birthplace of modern winemaking, Sonoma, California, welcome to The Winemakers. Local experts Sam Couturi, Bart Hansen, and Brian Casey, along with host John Myers, invite you to listen in as they discuss all facets of winemaking. So sit back, pour yourself a glass, and let's hear what the guys have to say this week.
Here we are. Beautiful Monterey. It was stunning this morning. I mean, clear as a bell. Is that coffee? No, I meant outside.
I'm gonna pour coffee.
Yeah. 1, 2, 3.
The coffee pour?
That was a coffee
Is that
pour.
our first ever Winemakers podcast? Coffee
I mean, it
pour
might. It's not. I don't think it is the earliest show that we've ever done, but it's pretty darn close.
It feels like it.
It feels like it. Welcome to the Winemakers, everyone. This is Brian Casey with Bart Hansen, Sam Couturi, James Joyner on the boards. And then, we have the keynote speaker from the direct-to-consumer symposium here in Monterey. So Karen MacNeil will be on with us today. She is, reading her resume or her bio would take up about half the show, but let's just say she's an educator. She's the keynote speaker. She's the author of the Wine Bible.
I think that's probably the only one that you can just say that one.
The 1, 2, and 3.
The Bible. The person who wrote the Bible is in the room.
The Bible on wine.
Right. I guess there's another Bible, but the one that I read.
And creator, editor, WineSpeed, and then also maybe inventor of Come Over October, curator of Come Over October. So Karen, welcome to the show. Good morning.
I want the entire listening audience to know you guys are bad. I went out with these guys last night for dinner, and the wines were fabulous, and they are really dangerous. So I'm a little worried this morning, but all right.
Well, so we have to do one thing. When you said the Wine Bible, remember the Wine Bible needs...
Oh, yeah, we need to ding. That's really the reason we needed to have them bring glasses down to our conference room here at the Hyatt Regency Del Monte.
I don't think we need to do that part of it.
We don't?
No. I don't think we need to plug the...
Why not?
Well, thank you, though. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And we're on the third Wine Bible, actually.
The third?
Congratulations.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It sold over 1 million copies.
Wow. That's a ding. Give me that a ding.
Yeah.
I had a copy that was kind of dog-eared and highlighted, and I lent it to someone and never got it back.
Oh.
So, yeah.
Well,
you'd call that a donation, Bart.
It was a donation, I guess.
We know somebody now, Bart.
Well,
we can get you a new one.
No, it was enough of that. More about you. Let's go back to you.
Well, there's so many, so many topics we are going to cover this over the next few days. So I thought we'd start by asking Karen what she wants to talk about. What kind of message what are you going to talk about today, actually?
I am going to talk about sort of the state of the wine industry, where we find ourselves at this moment in time, which is a slightly dangerous moment in time, I think, and also what the wine industry has going for it, which are a lot of things. But I think it's time to step up to the plate and begin to tell wine's positive story, positive historic story. Yeah, I know. Last January, so not this year, not 2025, but in January 2024, I did a video that I put out on Instagram called "Why I Hate Dry January." Yeah, we
got full ding and applause. We needed to rain in January, for crying out loud.
It got 15,000 responses and shares and likes and comments, and but the first one was from a somm at a very famous restaurant that will go unnamed, and the somm said, "Karen, I love the Wine Bible, so on and so forth. But you've got this all wrong.
Ooh.
We should be taking a break from wine in January." And I thought, oh my God, you're kidding. the somm of this very famous restaurant is promoting dry January. Yes. I mean, he didn't say, listen, this is my personal decision, which was, of course, fine, because we all know that we have a right to make personal decisions for our own bodies, of course. But what I started to see last year was that there were three problems. One is that the narrative around wine had increasingly become a narrative just about alcohol. Right. And to me, wine is more than alcohol, right? Wine is threaded into this rich tapestry of culture and history and art and religion. Number two is that the tenor of Dry January had begun to take on a kind of self-righteous tone. And I thought, that's kind of misplaced. Yeah. And number three was that, yes, wine does have this very positive story, long 8,000-year story of being a communal beverage that brings people together. We didn't know each other until last night, and now we're friends. Yeah. That happens all the time. Yeah. Every wine drinker knows that. Yep. And
starts conversation.
Yes, and yet no one is telling that kind of story. So that was the genesis, actually, of Come Over October.
Yeah, breaking bread, popping a cork. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and I think one of the reasons that it resonates personally with me is we're still in this post-pandemic world where we were essentially antisocial or supposed to be antisocial for so long and lost that connection and those moments of, opening 7 bottles of wine or so, maybe, over a 3-hour dinner and becoming strangers, becoming friends. So, I think that is a powerful message in reconnecting community, especially right now. Community is,
it's really true. I mean, the Surgeon General has said...
Fire the producer.
I think it was the Surgeon General who was calling then.
Exactly.
But anyway, the Surgeon General...
Coffee's giving you cancer too.
Yeah. The Surgeon General has said that, we're in a loneliness and social isolation epidemic.
Yeah.
And there's really nothing like just getting together, and it doesn't even have to be a big bottle of wine. It can be just 2 glasses of wine somewhere at home, at a restaurant, out in a park. Actually, Come Over October, which we will run again this coming October 2025, has given us, we had such incredible support from the wine industry all over the world, surprisingly, that it has led us to create a new campaign that we're launching in a couple of weeks in the spring called Share and Pair Sundays. And it's the same idea. It's get a friend or a family member or a neighbor, open some wine and have some food and just share and pair. It's something that has been done historically on Sundays for thousands of years. And, it could be popcorn and a glass of Chardonnay, right? I don't mean technical share, pairing, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the Sunday ritual of family dinners and stuff is a wonderful thing. And probably, if anything, in our days of being busy and racing everywhere, it's kind of gone away. But I know as a child, it was a big deal in our household. Yeah. At my grandmother's level. So yeah,
big Sunday gravy kind of thing on the stove.
Absolutely, yeah.
A couple of bottles of a couple of jugs filled up from the barrels in the barn.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
But it's one doesn't have to make a whole dinner. The point of that was being together, and that need to be together still exists.
Right. I mean, it is interesting how we were coming out of COVID, so to speak, and there are so many people have gotten very comfortable with just ordering food and having it delivered.
Right.
Like when you read about restaurants, sales in food to go has gone up, even though in-house it's not necessarily the same thing. And that's obviously part of that. People just found it easy and they don't want to go out and be bothered with it. It's killing us.
Well, you need to create reasons and events for people.
It's all about programming.
Right.
Sometimes it is.
Well, actually, all good campaigns do have three elements, which is a time, an action, and a reason. The reason, come over October, had we reached 1.7 billion impressions based on more than 500 print and digital articles, plus 4.6 million in social media, was that people understood it really easily. Come over October. Yeah. What are you supposed to do? Or when? It's in October. What are you supposed to do? Come over. And what's the reason? Because sharing wine and being together is fun.
I remember trying to come up with something in my brain that you could to just roll it into November. Like, okay, what goes with November, Yeah. Because it seems like we should just talk about it every month. It's such a great idea. So
we'll keep working on that one.
Right.
The November campaign.
Yeah. There's not a lot that goes with November.
But November's when you have time to come over anyway. In October, I go over to the winery. Right. Come over to bed.
How many days a week are you eating out in restaurants, do you think, on average?
Well, I live in St. Helena, which is a small town in the Napa Valley.
Some pretty nice restaurants.
Yeah. I regret to inform you, I don't go to the French Laundry every weekend.
Right.
You
don't have a table there.
Yes, my little corner table. No, I don't. Sorry, Thomas Keller has not bestowed that on me, but
it's all right. He hasn't answered Sam's
responded to my emails either. So.
Okay.
I probably only go out maybe once a week or so. Part of that is that I like to cook.
Right.
So, and I'm so busy in my business that I find that coming home, standing in my kitchen, chopping something, and drinking a glass of wine just is so relaxing. I love that feeling.
Yeah. And are you listening to music when you're doing that?
I am listening
to
podcasts. Or podcasts, or I don't know, kitties running around meowing like, feed me. I don't know. Lots of, sound.
Dinner time in the whole household.
Yes.
Yeah. And do you like to entertain? You invite friends over, and I'm assuming you have some winemaker friends in the area?
I do. Although, it's a funny thing. It takes a long time, actually, for a journalist to have close relationships with winemakers, because winemakers feel like, oh, can I really, am I crossing a line? I mean, can we really be friends? Maybe I should maintain a kind of
be careful what they say,
professional distance. Yeah. And of course, from my perspective, I'm like, no, come on over. Of course we're friends.
Well, it's interesting because before you came in, we were talking about it, is that you are a wine writer who's never really rated wines, right? So that should easily remove that part of it, right?
Right.
Yes and no.
Like bringing over the fancy bottle of champagne to butter up some 96s, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Just to be neighborly.
Right.
Well, writers are different than critics, and I'm not a critic.
Thank you. That's you're absolutely right.
Yeah. But in a way, it's hard to know where criticism is going. There are fewer and fewer critics. We're no longer in an era of the real power of critics, with Bob Parker no longer himself critiquing wine. And every bit of research I read or polls that are done continues to show that the influence of critics is waning. Yeah. And there are probably no real critics coming up in the system too much either.
It's so interesting because, you saw critics work for another critic, and then they start their own thing, and then they hire other critics, and it's just
eventually they'll all go do their own thing.
Right. And then you're reading the, Sam Smith newsletter, and he doesn't even taste the wines. Right. So, yeah.
Well, and for people to get access to those anymore, like how many people do you know under 30 that would pick up a wine magazine and read reviews in it?
Right.
So if anything, they would see them as little shelf talkers if they were in a wine shop or in a store that would say 89 points from so-and-so.
If anybody's putting out 89-point shelf talkers, I applaud your gumption.
And wonder what the initials mean, right? Like, who is JS?
Right, exactly.
Did you, we were talking last night at dinner. You, like myself, left home at an early age. Did you ever work in a restaurant?
Yes, of course I did. I was the so-called breakfast girl in a steakhouse when I was 15.
Was that the actual name of the position, breakfast girl?
Yeah, breakfast girl. And it meant that you were half a busser, bus tables, and the other half of the morning I spent, because this was a steakhouse, their whole deal was that you would get this big piece of toasted garlic bread with your steak. And so some person, me, the breakfast girl, every morning would have to cut these giant loaves of bread into sections and dip them all into these rolls, into pots of oily, buttery garlic, and build this giant, 5-foot tray of bread saturated with so that it could be quickly grilled off by the chefs and sent out. So
your skin must just been infused with
I'm
garlic.
Telling you, to this day, I hate garlic bread. I cannot. Sorry, garlic. Sorry, bread. Sorry, Gilroy. But I cannot eat garlic bread.
Take the 17 home and
yes, exactly. Yeah, even getting near Gilroy makes me nervous. It's true.
It can really smell like garlic when you're driving through Gilroy in the right time of year, or the wrong time of year, depending on your perspective on it.
So was that it? It was just at a young age you were the breakfast girl. Were you ever a server or in like a fine dining restaurant?
I wasn't a server, but before wine, I loved restaurants and I loved fine dining, and I became fascinated by. In fact, before I was a wine writer, I wrote about food, and I was interested in the whole world of gastronomy, of dining behavior, and the origin of restaurants, and the invention of manners, and all these kinds of things that we don't think about on a given day, but that are very, to me, very fascinating. So eventually, I studied service. And it was hard to study service because you think about, why are forks on the left? And how would you go about figuring that out? And this was in the 1980s, before you could sort of Google that, let's say. So I started in New York, the New York Professional Service School. And this was my big idea for making money.
This is a school designed specifically for
servers.
Sure, yeah.
To teach servers how to serve elegantly and the reasons behind service. Yeah. And I thought this was my big idea for making a lot of money, because I thought, think of all the restaurants with bad service, right? We'll make a fortune. Well, no restaurant with bad service ever hired us or ever sent a single waiter. The people who sent waiters were Danny Meyer at Union Square Cafe, the Four Seasons, restaurants that already had great service who wanted to be even better.
Yeah, polish.
But so I was in restaurants a lot, and I would often do consulting gigs with restaurants where I would go in and revamp their service. And also, luckily, when I was more or less starting out, this was in a day in New York before the MS program came to the the Master Sommelier program came to the United States, there were very few sommeliers, and they were French. They had tuxedos, they had Tastevans, the whole 9 yards. So I worked on service with a famous restaurateur in New York named Richard Lavin, and he said to me one day, he was opening a new restaurant, and he said, why don't you train the staff about wine? I said, okay. And he said, and since you're doing that, just go ahead and write the wine list. So I said, great. So I started also writing wine lists.
And based on what was your initial idea for the list?
And how much experience did you have drinking wine at this point in your life?
I had a fair amount of experience, not as much as I have now, but what I knew several things. I wanted to make the list primarily American wines, and I thought about it economically. I thought, if two people were dining, they probably, this is not true any longer, but they probably are not going to spend more on wine than it would cost to have a third person. And that was true in the early days of it, well, in the exciting 80s in New York. Today, it's very not true, right? We often spend considerably more on a bottle of wine than on a third person's entree and dessert. But here's what I knew I didn't want to do. I'd hung out in restaurants enough to watch how distributors would come in around 11:30 at night, their tie off, looking a little disheveled and tired, dropping off a few samples and wanting to, drink with you. I'm like, sorry, buddy, that's not going to work. So I set up this system of every Thursday morning and Tuesday morning too, from 10 to 11, I'm going to taste. We're going to sit down. You're going to run me through whatever wines you want to show me. And salesmen grumbled about this. Man, they did not want to do it this way. I'm like, great, our list doesn't have to have any of your wines then. Right. And eventually they came around, and it was great because they were serious. I was serious. I also learned a lot from these guys. They knew a lot. And we put together a really fabulous wine list, but it was serious. It wasn't just samples dropped off at midnight.
As somebody who's beaten the pavement in New York selling wine and been there tagging along at 11 o'clock, bottle drops with disheveled. I wasn't wearing a tie, but they were wearing ties. I would way rather do it that way.
Yeah.
And know what you're, the New York wine sales beat is such a slog, and, some are busy or they're, shining you on, whatever it is, you're waiting, you're hustling buses, subways, taxis. Right. I would way rather be like, at 10 o'clock, I'm going to meet with so-and-so.
Well, and that's a good point, Sam, because I think they knew that, I wasn't going to give them half my attention. I was going to give them my full attention. I was going to give the wines my full attention. And, but we were going to do it in a reasonable way that was respectful of their time and also of mine.
My dad always says 10 o'clock is the best time to taste wine anyway.
Yeah.
Maybe that's
right
just
when you get up.
Maybe that's just when he needs it. I don't know.
Colgate and Cabernet.
Colgate and Cabernet. I've been there.
Yeah.
It's more like Tom's of Maine in my parents' household, but
yeah. I was going for the rhyme.
Right. It's alliteration.
Right. Right.
Karen, how do you feel about wine lists that are, 17 pages long as opposed to, what I always fought for was a list that had around 80 to 125 bottles of wine, because that to me felt like it was carefully curated. It was sort of personal. You had a little bit of everything, but also you could actually educate the rest of the staff on the majority of the wines.
Yeah, menus have personalities, and you can often sort of intuit the loves of the chef by looking at a menu. And it makes no sense for wine lists to not have a personality too. Yeah. You should be able to. I think I feel more comfortable when I feel like, ooh, I would like to meet this person who put this list together. But if anybody saw the New York Times the other day, the great Andre Soltner of Lutèce, one of the most famous chefs ever in New York, died a few days ago. He was 92, I think. And in its day, Lutèce was the French Laundry, before the French Laundry existed. And it was very, very French. And when you went there, I remember the first time I went there, I was taken there and I was, of course, terrified. I prayed that no one would hand me the wine list because it was one of these giant, giant, giant books. So anyway, though, I got to know Andre Soltner a little bit. And at the back of this, I think it was the back. It might have been I think it was the back page of this heavy tome was a list that said the title was Andre Soltner's Favorite Wines.
Yes.
And it was 12 wines. They were all from Alsace because that's where he was from.
Right.
So one day I called him up and I said, so, Mr. Soltner, what percentage of sales comes from just those 12 wines at the back? And he said, 70%. I'm like, oh my God. This was at a time when nobody even had heard of Alsace barely. And yet, I think people logically felt like, if it's good enough for the chef, if it's good enough for Andre Soltner, if these are his favorite wines, great, it's good enough for me.
Yeah.
And that taught me a lot. After that, I thought, I'm not going to put together a list with, even though it would be fun to have big, deep vintages of Colgan or something. Colgan didn't exist back then, but
Chateau Montelena.
But where's
Brian?
What you love, what the chef loves, makes for a much more interesting list.
Well, and there's definitely, when you look at the wine list, you can immediately see how they feel about the wine list, right? Like there are some wine lists you look at and you go, oh, obviously a distributor put this together because it's all the same wines from one distributor. And immediately for me, I'm like disappointed, right? Also, when you see wines, like no thought put into a section of wines, since it's the year of Zinfandel, Zinfandel a lot of time.
Did you know that?
Just ignored.
I learned that just last night.
Oh, you were paying attention.
I was.
Mission accomplished. It's the year of Zinfandel. Come over October and have a couple of bottles of Zinfandel.
Exactly. But, and then you can tell, like, oh, it's obviously this person's very into Pinot Noir who put this together, and that's always disappointing. And then going back to the huge list, being someone working in the wine business, of course, I want to go through it and look at it. But for the consumer, daunting, right? Mm.
I also think there's something more to the Andre Soltner list with the Alsatian wine. If you're a, Alsatian-born French chef, those wines are probably the best wines to go with the food that you're making, right?
Yes, yes.
I mean, there is something that about focusing that, and I don't know, it's the terroir of the food and the terroir of the wine matches, right? There's some wisdom there.
Wink and a nod from the chef saying these you should probably order these.
This is what you should do. Right.
Every wine list I wrote after that, I inserted a page called What the Chef Drinks. Yeah. And every chef, I would say, I'm going to put out a whole bunch of wines. We're going to do this over 5 days. Every day I'm going to put out 12 wines. You don't have to tell me anything, just taste them and tell me what you instinctively like. And I'm going to write that page. And again, you would see bunches of sales would come off that one page.
If you were like, somebody who was trying to sell wine direct to consumer, maybe something that you should do is every once in a while drop like what the winemaker's drinking out of your own wine. I don't know, just in a thought. Is anything that happening around here?
People ask me all the time about Napa Valley, like where do winemakers hang out? I'm like, aisle 5 in Sunshine Market, the grocery store, our tacky little grocery store. I shouldn't say tacky. It's wonderful. I love it. I go there every day.
Little ticky-tacky houses on the hillside.
But it has a fantastic aisle of wine from all over the world. And that's, you want to see who knows what. Kathy Corison, she's in aisle 5, just like everybody else.
I mean, we have Sonoma's Best does that in Sonoma. Great wines from all over the world.
Yeah.
You drive by it and never think that, and you walk in and you see the selection. And
it's also at the confluence of Sonoma and 8th Street East, where all the winemakers in Sonoma work.
Right. And so they get a lot of traffic there. So it's the same sort of thing.
Shout out Todd Jolly.
Yeah. And in Santa Rosa, it would be Bottle Barn. Shout out to Barry, Bottle Barn, big warehouse, but the amount of wines they have, it's amazing. And you always see people that they're
crazy prices.
Yeah.
So last night when we were talking, and this is weird because we usually don't know anything about first-time guests when they come to the show. So it's weird that I know that your answer to the aha wine moment is your 89-cent bottle of Bulgarian red. What point, though, like how does you go from drinking a glass of that and doing your homework, very diligent, I definitely wouldn't have been doing one of those things, to this level of wine. And part of that is this note that Barbara passed me, which is apparently there's a great story of one of the first times that you were tasting wine in New York and you weren't allowed to talk about it. You were just there to observe and, not be heard. Yeah. Well, one of the best things about the culture of wine in America today is how many tastings there are. If you're in a state with a lot of wineries like California, boy, you can learn a lot, right? You can go and visit wineries. There's all kinds of information digitally. But even 30 years ago, it was really hard to learn about wine. If you were in New York, as I was at that time, there were no classes about wine. Retailers didn't pour any wine. You weren't close to a wine region. There was actually no way to learn about wine. The only way you could learn about wine was to either have a benefactor. You had a parent who bought a lot of wine and you got to drink some really interesting stuff, or you knew someone, or you were independently wealthy so that you could go to a certain wine shop over and over again, make friends, and buy some interesting bottles. So I had none of those. I didn't have a benefactor. I didn't have a parent who turned me on to wine. I didn't know anyone who was wealthy enough to have a lot of wine, and I was on food stamps. I did not have any money to be in what in that day was Sherry Lehman buying, white Lehman. Burgundy. R.I.P. So I had become a pretty successful food writer, though, and I was writing for the New York Times Magazine, which was really... Take that moment of New York juxtaposition for a second, of the successful food writer writing for the New York Times, also on food stamps. Okay, go on, sorry. So as I was saying before, though, what I realized I really loved was the whole world of gastronomy, not just like how to make the risotto, but dining behavior and manners. And the world of gastronomy includes beverages. And the 4 big beverages of civilization are coffee, tea, beer, and wine. Those 4 beverages tell the story of virtually every civilization. So you can teach yourself by reading about coffee, tea, and beer. It's hard to teach. It was hard then to teach yourself about wine because, first of all, almost every book that was written by British authors. It would be gray page after gray page. I'd be like, Meursault, Macon, Montagny, are these places? Are they grapes? What? The Europeans assume a certain familiarity with European geography that an American wouldn't have. So even though I forced myself to read everything I could about wine, I was still confused a lot. And I thought, I have to find a way to taste more wine. So one of my friends, in those days, the whole world of wine communications was sort of owned by 6 men in New York, and they wrote for everybody. It was the heyday of magazines. They wrote for not just New York Magazine, but Vogue and GQ and Playboy and every magazine.
including all the women's magazines, were written by one of these 6 guys. So one of them was a friend of mine, and I knew that every week they would do these incredible tastings because people would fly in, like the Bordeaux guys would fly in on Monday, and the port producers would fly in on Wednesday, and Chianti Classico would fly in on Friday. I mean, it was just amazing, the tastings that were done for them. So I asked him if they would let me taste with them. So he asked them. And they took a vote, and the answer was that I could on one condition, which was that I not talk. So I tasted with them.
That's unbelievable.
Every week for years. And I didn't talk. And by the way, I didn't want to talk. I didn't consider myself knowledgeable enough to give my opinion, but I wanted to ask questions. That was frustrating.
So what? I mean, I have to ask this. So you're there all tasting. They're talking amongst themselves?
You know, one of the things I learned from them is they didn't chat a lot. They were very serious. They, and I adopted their seriousness, which I'm forever thankful, for which I'm forever thankful.
Thankful that with your seriousness, you chose to come on our show. So.
But, you know, they took notes. They really concentrated. They paid attention to the wine. And then if they were going to chat, yes, they would kind of go off to the side and talk and compare notes.
And did you sit there and take notes?
Yep.
And no one ever asked you what you thought?
Nope.
Oh, my God.
And Bart,
amazing.
Karen, do you think that was because you were a woman or just because you were sort of an outsider that was coming into the room?
I think it was because of 3 things. I was a woman, I was young, and they didn't consider me to have any valid opinions. So, I mean, why talk to me? They weren't going to learn anything. And I was an outsider. I wasn't in that male club of, these were all men who were, of course, more wealthy than me, but they were older than me. But, you know, in retrospect, this was a good thing because I had to sit with myself and think about these wines and figure out how I was going to describe wine, how I was going to approach it. And to this day, I consider part of the success of the Wine Bible is that I developed my own thinking about wine. I developed my own style and approach and way of writing that wasn't just a copy of what they thought.
Right.
So it turned out to be not a bad thing.
Almost like an only child that had a really good imagination and learned to self-soothe and read books. You know what I mean?
There's something sort of, aside from being blatantly misogynistic, sort of like monkish about that kind of wine education where you sat there and got to experience, right, and the great wines of the world and learn them, but also with like a vow of silence. It seemed, right. I don't know. There's something for me that kind of like brings it back to how wine began.
But I mean, it's good if you're a writer because you have to be sort of used to solitude a little bit anyway. But I have to say that I don't think there's enough of this right now in our current American wine culture, because one of the things that really bothers me, and I'm going to make my big apology to the headquarters of WSET right now. I'm sorry, WSET.
Hopefully they're listening.
I know you have done everything so much for the world, but you've also created a whole generation of people who don't necessarily think for themselves. They just copy, an endless copy of, I'm supposed to think about this wine this way, right, and use these descriptors. Right. And I think that's dangerous in the end. You have to eventually, you have to sit with yourself and develop the ability to be a good thinker about wine, more than just a good memorizer of the facts.
That's really very interesting way to look at it, because it is. It's this is what it is. Remember this and move on.
Yeah,
and
that's a good beginning. It's a fabulous foundation, but it's not the end.
Right.
It's the beginning.
Right.
How would you advise somebody who is in that position and wants to break out of that? In today's world, how would you, you're not going to find the room full of the 6 old wise misogynists to put it all in front of you like that anymore. I mean, I think that's, and there's this article, I don't know, one of the doom and gloom articles of the last week of wine suffering from the ghost of premiumization and the exclusivity and, the making of the great things of the world completely out of reach for even fairly successful people, let alone, somebody who's just learning, who's in your position, food stamps and successful. How would you do that now?
Yeah. What comes to mind is I started the CIA, the Culinary Institute of America's professional wine studies program in Napa Valley in 1996. By the way, the reason the CIA can be called the CIA is because it predates the other CIA.
No shit.
It predates the Central Intelligence Agency by 1 year. Who knew, right?
Yeah.
But anyway.
I'd like to see them fight it about it.
Yeah. Although, I feel like I should offer my consulting services to that other CIA.
The other CIA?
Don't you think they could use that? But anyway.
I vote for Karen.
I remember teaching, and I would look out over this group of students, and they were all, I would say, our students were generally, I would say, late 30s to late 40s. They were, they were adults. They really wanted to learn a lot more about wine, but they were not kids. They weren't necessarily 21. So, we would be doing a tasting, and I would see people, they would go through, they would take some notes, and then they would sit back. And I would look out and I would think, you think you're done, but you're not done. You're not done, because I can watch you and see that you haven't thought hard enough about that wine. You've tasted it, you've made an assessment, you've checked the boxes about whether or not the tannin is X or Y, whether or not there's a lot of oak or not, but you haven't thought deeply enough. And I never said that because I felt like as a teacher, it's not a good idea to, single out a student in class like that. But
my teachers had that same thought.
But I think, when you think you're done, sit with the wine a little bit more. Pay attention a little bit more. I remember the first time I ever tasted with Bob Parker. This is when I learned this lesson for myself. So we were invited, unbeknownst to us, it was just going to be the two of us. And we were invited to taste 125 German Rieslings.
Wait, first of all, how do you know him? How do
I know Bob?
Yeah.
Well, I think this was the very first time I met him, actually.
Okay.
But then I know him many times after that, because we occasionally would do seminars together at the CIA for charity. And he would sort of, he was Bob. I did color commentary.
Well, the rest of us call him Robert, I think is probably why he's outside.
Oh. Well, anyway, so I go into this room. Here's Bob Parker. I knew what he looked like, so I knew it was him, but I had never met him before. And down this long table, here is 125 German Rieslings lined up, every bottle, and on each side of every bottle, there's a glass. He's standing on one side of the table, and I'm on the other. And the importer says, okay, so, glad you're both here. have fun.
Ready, set, go.
Yeah, and I'll see you whenever you're done.
Yeah.
So Bob Parker was done with 125 German Rieslings when I was on Wine 24. Yeah. And I thought to myself, is he just a fast, brilliant taster? Well, the answer to that is yes. Am I a slow taster? Probably. But the more I've thought about that memory over the years, I've said something else was going on here. I was waiting for every wine to talk to me. I was going to write. You can't really write well unless you have something more to say than just, good acid, blah, blah, blah.
Hallelujah.
So I think sometimes we taste too fast. People don't let the wine talk to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And leave space. Sometimes it's even when you're doing a podcast, we in real time, when there's a pause in conversation, people get a little uncomfortable, but when you're listening to it, you don't notice it at all. And sort of
pause
with wine.
Pauses
sometimes
are good.
It's okay to just sort of
they are.
sit back and think.
Like commas in Bart's emails. It's good.
My goodness,
Wow, you got
I've
it.
seen 500 wines tasted in about a 4-hour span over 2 days.
It doesn't seem right for wine or taster. Like, how could you? We've all sat through blending sessions or tasting the Cabernets for the first time, all the different lots, and you go through 25 6-month-old Cabernets, and afterwards you want to bathe in baking soda toothpaste. Imagine 500 wines in 4 hours. Like, what do you learn from wine 467? Like, there's nothing left.
Right. That's why, Karen, when I would buy wines for restaurants, and especially if I was going to have something put on the list by the glass, but even for things that were just by the bottle, I would always ask the reps to just leave the bottle with me. And some of them didn't want to do that. I think they had the experience in the past with other people where they would drop bottles and then they would never hear back from the beverage director or somm. But I really wanted to taste it when it was first opened. I wanted to taste it while it was sitting in the glass over the next half an hour, and then an hour later that night, and then the next day.
Right.
And I would fall in love with the wine. It was amazing. And so I think some of them got to know that when they did that, there was a better chance of me actually putting the wine on the list because I wanted to spend time with it.
Right.
Do you think that experience with you having to be quiet in that room was sort of planted a little seed as an educator for you, and maybe wanting to do the Wine Bible and having something where people could have information to access on an easier level?
Yeah. I mean, the Wine Bible was a direct result of what I taught myself. And it was the book I wished I had had. Yeah. And it was very unlike all the books that I tried to learn from.
So it's kind of like your inner dialogue. You were sort of, how you taught yourself is you were telling people how to teach themselves.
And it was a dialogue. I am adamant that we should speak in direct American English, conversational.
Wait, what do you mean by that?
I talk American good.
No, I mean, are you saying not using terms like terroir or?
No, terroir is a word I think most people in wine probably understand. But let me see if I can think of an example.
Élevage, délestage.
No, it's not so much terms, but would someone say, the oak regime on this wine is...
Right.
No, they would say this wine was put in an oak barrel for 24 months or something, right? They would say it more directly. Yeah. But if you read, so many wine books have a slightly off-putting, formal
Stuffy
way of writing about wine. And I really don't. The other thing I made myself promise myself is that I would not be internally referential, by which I mean, because these guys would occasionally be mean to me, and here's how they would do it. They would be holding a glass of wine, they would look at each other, they would swirl the wine, and they would say, oh, reminds me of the Vieux Telegraph 64, don't you think? Knowing full well that I had never tasted Vieux Telegraph 1964, right?
Good though.
That this is like that. In fact, one of the things that winemakers do that I hate as a journalist is you say, what was the vintage like? They're like, well, I think the 2024s are like the 14s and a little bit like the 6s. You want to slay them with a knife right away. Like, what the
Take
fuck?
note.
Guys,
Yeah.
come on.
Winemakers listening out.
Tell me
Exactly.
if you can't tell me what it's like, then don't talk. But tell me what it is actually like. Don't be internally referential, because that keeps people out. That kept me out. And in my writing, I never say, this is like that. If I can't say what it's like in the beginning, then I haven't been good enough on this wine.
Yeah.
Do you think that the way wine tasting experiences at wineries has changed, in that instead of standing at the bar and if a popular place 3 deep and you're having to wave someone down to tell them you're ready for the next wine, that the way we do it in most places now, where you sit with a glass, and whether it's 4 glasses in front of you or they're poured one at a time, that it gives the opportunity for more conversation, which is better education?
I do think so. I mean, I think that not giving people the ability to, especially when you're learning about wine, you have to taste comparatively. You really have to have a few glasses in front of you so that you can figure out, oh, this one's more crisp and fresh. I like that, or whatever it is you're figuring out. And that's different than just sort of the bar scene where like someone's pouring you now for the next wine. It's hard to learn because, wine, here's how wine and food are different. Food is actually its own language and wine is not. So if you say to somebody, here's a strawberry, what does it taste like? They say, it tastes like a strawberry. Great. It is a strawberry. It tastes like a strawberry. And we call that strawberry flavor. Everybody's in agreement. We're all fine. But if you say to someone, here's a Vermentino, what does it taste like? And they say, it tastes like Vermentino. That's not helpful, right? Because wine is not its own inherent language in the way that food is. So with wine, you need time to create metaphors in your head, because all you're tasting is metaphors. You're tasting chemical configurations that are reminding you of things. So if someone is just giving you one glass and you're standing at a bar, it's hard. It's even hard when you're a pro to remember, like, 3 glasses back, what was that metaphor that wine seemed like? Much easier to do when you're seated. You can write something down if you want, and you can taste comparatively.
Come back to it, see if it still holds.
Yeah, and doesn't even mean that you have to choose, quote unquote, the best wine. Let's say you've got 4 wines in front of you, but just so you can be like, oh, I see, this one is this way and this one is this way.
I've been recently in my tasting room, we're pouring 2 different Zinfandels, same vintage, same basic winemaking, but 2 different places.
Same winemaker?
Same winemaker, yeah. And when I have people taste them together, they want me to tell them the difference of the 2 wines. And I won't do that. I said, no, you try them, and then let's talk about what you're tasting, because everybody tastes things different. and their sensations are different. So I love the fact that you said that. It's all metaphors, and you have to come up with your own metaphors.
Right.
And then because I've found times where I'll say, I get a little more tannin in the cheeks with this, and they'll kind of look at me like, because they're not picking up that same thing. And I said, this is that example of why you need to form your own tastes.
Right. Yeah.
And how do you do that? You taste more and more and more.
How do we break out of the sort of ranking culture of it all, though? Because the Auto-Tet thing, and we would always pour Auto-Tet side by side. And this is I've made it an hour without being self-promotional, Bart. You should be proud of me. Our Grenache program, 2 different vineyards, made with our French counterparts. And we would pour them for people side by side, which is the way that we envisioned them to be experienced, where you're tasting Oakville Ranch and you're tasting Rossi Ranch in the same vinification, and they're different because of where they're grown. But invariably what happened is people would pick a favorite. And we don't want them to have a favorite. We want them to
buy both.
Well, of course, and at least a case each.
But to discuss the differences and the similarities. But we noticed that, over 90% of people would say, well, I think this one's better. It wasn't, totally. And they wouldn't even talk about the other one. They would just say this. So it was sort of like a competition rather than a comparison tasting.
So how do we and I think it's a cultural thing. I think, the point scoring system probably fuels that.
Well, you're giving them a binary option in that case. I would give them
more wine. Okay.
I would give them 3 wines first of all, and let them choose which 2 are the best. But but Kermit Lynch has this favorite. He said this to me once, and I loved this line. I said, we were tasting a Beaujolais, and I said, "What is this good for?" And he said, "No." He said, "Good for what? Good for oysters? Good for lamb chops? Good for sex?" I'm like, okay. It was like, when you think about a wine, you have to think about it as having possible contexts. So maybe wine A is good for, who knows what, drinking right now. Yeah. Wine B might be great if you had Grenache you're talking about. Who knows what? It may be great if you have some bunch of Mediterranean vegetables on the grill or something. And so to help people see wine in a context, as opposed to just right now in this tasting room, a binary choice.
Yeah. Context
Great is answer. Everything.
Yeah.
So when you wrote the wine library, the wine Bible,
which
wine Bible,
we just got sued.
When you said working on 3, I thought that you already had a 3rd.
No, the 3rd one is already out. That's the 3rd edition is the current edition, and then I'm starting to work on Wine Bible 4.
Oh, wow. So how does it then change every time? There's still some of the same information but gets updated, or it's completely new?
You need the complete set. Buy a case. It's the same logic. Buy them all.
No, after I did the first Wine Bible and I was getting ready to do the 2nd edition, I said to the publisher, so what do I do? How do you do this? Yeah. Because you could just take out every statistic and fill it in with a new statistic, right? Could be like, okay, there are 1,000 wineries in Bordeaux and now there are 1,200 wineries in Bordeaux or whatever. And she said, you can do it however you want. It's up to you. So I hate that advice too. It throws it back. But again, now you have to think about it. So I realized that I could just paint the walls of every room, or I could take the whole house down to the studs and really build it differently and really do it differently. So every time I super revise it all, not just the statistics, but people who love the Wine Bible also love it because there are all these curious cultural asides, hundreds of side boxes.
Yeah.
And I
get
am
caught up in the side box.
I am on the hunt for those all the time. Like, and when I go to a wine region, I'm always asking questions like that.
Awesome.
Like, how many sheep are there for every winemaker in New Zealand? If anybody's going to know that, it's me, because I love that stuff. And I think it makes, it informs your cultural appreciation of a place, even something as crazy as that.
Well, at the end of the day, the reason that it's all compelling is it's people stories, right? And what people are doing and how they've been doing it for hundreds of years and thousands of years in some places. So, I'm down for taking it all down to the studs.
Yeah.
I'm sure that, and your interior decorators love it too.
And do you take into account that maybe the average age of the reader is getting younger and younger as the editions are coming out? I mean, do you talk then about, the rise of quote unquote natural wine and little bit more esoteric, unique varietals that are coming back?
Yeah. I mean, you have to, because the tent is now very big. There's and places. When I wrote the first Wine Bible, it never even occurred to me that I would ever have a chapter on China or on Great Britain.
Right.
But those are in Wine Bible 3, and they'll be in Wine Bible 4. We might be a little bit tapped out in terms of places, but we're certainly, as things shift to colder regions, who knows?
And have you tried a lot of wine from China?
Yes, I have gone to China many times, and I think I was the second person, not Chinese person, who went to Aoyun in the Himalayas, which was the first. It's owned by LVMH, and it was the first real luxury Chinese wine.
Yeah.
It predated the Lafite Long Dai wine. So are
we missing out?
I did a big tasting of Chinese wines in my office a couple of weeks ago, and actually the Aoyun didn't show as well as. But it's a fascinating wine. I mean, it's made at 10,000.
Okay, I was going to ask, what is the growing region like?
It is.
What's the soil? The climate's got to be out of control.
It is. It takes 4 days to get there. You're. I'm not kidding.
Worse than Walla Walla?
You are. I know.
Wow.
Poor Walla Walla. Come on. I love
Shout
Walla
out to our friends
Walla.
out in
Really
Walla
have
Walla.
to
We
want to
love
get
you guys.
there.
Yeah, but it's worth it once you do. Come on, guys. Walla Walla is very cool. But
Please let us back.
yeah. But the Himalayas are astounding. And what is most amazing is, first of all, there are yaks everywhere. And you have to love these yaks. They're in the vineyard. You're going to have yak tea and yak yogurt for breakfast, yak dumplings for lunch, and yak hot pot for dinner. Yeah. And that's all. So you have to really, and yaks
and maybe some mushrooms.
And a lot of mushrooms, although a lot of mushrooms, the very first year that Aoyun made wine, which was 2015, I think, I remember talking to Maxence, the winemaker, who said that he didn't realize that all of these different families were, Tibetan families were, first of all, different kind of clans, and that they were all matriarchal. So it took him a year he would write orders and nobody would show up. And it took him a long time to figure out, okay, there's a certain woman, you got to get to her. And then the next harvest, he tells all the women, okay, this is the day, this is when we're going to pick. Nobody's there. Everyone's gone. He says to some old person in one of the villages, where is everybody? The shiitake mushrooms just sprouted. They've gone up into the mountains. Well, first of all, you're already at 10,000 feet. And these people have taken all the yaks and they're going way up to pick shiitake mushrooms to sell to the Japanese. Actually, it's very big, important. There's no money, by the way, in Tibet.
Right.
There are no banks. It was otherworldly.
So what wine do you pair with yak dumplings and yak hot pot?
Yeah, well, if you go there, it's very cold there as well. So for me, I was wedded to my yak tea. I was like, okay. And the wines are fairly big reds. You could pass off Aoyun as a Napa Valley Cabernet.
Are they growing vinifera Cabernet? They're growing Cabernet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Cabernet and Syrah in particular does very well.
I remember last year hearing about one of the largest beverage companies in the world buying up property at elevation in the Himalayas and in Nepal somewhere, and I thought that was really odd.
10,000 feet's got to be.
See, I heard it like around 3,000. This is even higher than I was thinking.
3,000 meters.
What's the growing season like?
Short. And
2 weeks, Sam. 2 weeks.
Hurry up and ripen.
Yeah. Well,
nobody breathed its bloom.
What the winemaker was worried about was that fermentations would not conduct themselves in quite the same way because of the lack of oxygen.
Right.
You are tired. All the time at that elevation. Walking is just walking. You're like, wow, you have to get really accustomed to, and you don't see anybody jogging by on the road. First of all, the only people in the road are yaks. So, yeah.
How did you get involved in this? How did this come about that you?
I knew about Aoyun and I said to LVMH that I wanted to go, and Jean-Guillaume Prats was who is part of the Prats family that started Coste d'Estournel. I knew his father. I knew Jean-Guillaume. I really like him a lot. And it was under his leadership that Aoyun began. And one day he was telling me all about it, about how, you have to take all these flights and then you finally get the last flight into what is called Shangri-La. And by the way, it's so mountainous, right? You can't, the runways are very short. So you're in a small plane and it's tilting back and forth because of all these wind currents. And you're essentially, it's like landing on an aircraft carrier. Yeah. You're going to land on a mountaintop.
And hit the brakes.
Yeah. And then you're going to get in an SUV and go for 9 hours in this SUV up on these roads that are, they're the old parts of the old Silk Road, right? So they were tea routes,
wagon routes,
carrying tea by oxen and things like that. So we had a Buddhist driver named Tashi who was wonderful, and so it was me. So I'm sitting in the front seat with Tashi, who spoke pretty basic good English, and he looked very much like a Buddhist monk. So one day on the second day, we're going around this corner and, there are no guardrails. Of course, you go around the corner and there are 10,000 yaks in the road. And I said to him, Tashi, how many accidents are there? There must be a lot of accidents. These roads are, amazing. And he looked at me and he said, accidents? And I knew he understood English. And he said, no accidents. I said, how can there be no accidents? There are no guardrails. He said, no. Either you're fine or it's your time.
Yeah.
Okay. That's
there you
the
are.
Buddhist way.
Yeah. So
wine or it's your time.
And nobody drinks wine and drives, let me tell you.
Right.
Especially the Buddhists. Right.
Yes.
Yak tea.
So what are you doing? We were talking last night. Later today, you're doing a little Pinot Noir seminar.
Tomorrow. Yes. Seminar for some international MWs and global wine educators who have been invited to California by the Wine Institute. And I've done this several years in the past. And I get to show them why I think California small production Pinot Noir is just extraordinary.
And this is going to be in person with them?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great.
Yeah. Tomorrow. Today, I'm at the DTC conference with you all, and I'm excited to give the keynote address here in just a little bit.
Yeah, you're going to get the party started.
I hope to.
Yeah.
We'll see.
So, can I ask a question? Today, you're at a very dignified podcast, a keynote speaker. Tomorrow, you're teaching MWs. You know, a rarefied position of, top tier wine writer and educator in the world. Not a lot of people like you. Will you talk just sort of like what, maybe not your day to day, but the flow of your profession? How much time are you educating, writing, traveling the world? How does it all how does it work? How do you get to be, what's life like when you're Karen MacNeil?
Well, I think of myself as one of the, I want to think of myself as one of the hardest working women in the wine business. So I work really hard, and there's a combination of writing every week, tasting every week, both going to events, giving speeches, giving classes, doing a lot of corporate work, because that's the sort of money that pays for writing, because writing does not pay.
Right, food stamps.
Yes, exactly. And even teaching doesn't pay very well. But I do presentations, private wine seminars for law firms and insurance firms and tech firms, and so companies. And that's very fun and very different, because believe me, those guys do not want to know the oak regimen, so to speak, right? That's part entertainment, and part you have to be very grounded, though, because somebody in the audience is going to say, so what do you think about the 1990 Vegas Athelia? And man, you have to know what you think about the 1990 Vegas Athelia. So I'm tasting a lot too, not as much as critics taste, but probably about 2,000 wines a year.
Wow.
As a basic keeping up kind of amount.
When you do those seminars, do you find that there's usually in every seminar there's one person that wants to kind of challenge your knowledge?
Totally.
Or show their knowledge?
Yes, exactly. And the thing to do is, at that moment, is to move right close to them. Hopefully they're sitting down and you're standing up. And you move right close to them. Especially if it's a man. A man will stop talking right then. Yeah. Like, what a good point you had. Let's expand on that.
Yeah. That's awesome.
I'm sorry. Sorry, men of the world. But also,
apologize to us.
I also, I do a digital newsletter called WineSpeed. I don't know if you guys get WineSpeed. You should get WineSpeed.
We do now. By the time this airs, we will be up to speed.
It's really fun, and it comes out every Friday. We send it by email to all of our subscribers. It has a wine quiz, so you could make it a challenge, to see if you could pass the wine quiz every week. People get very attached to the wine quiz. And
who does the questions, Karen?
Guess who?
Okay, good.
And the hardest working woman in the wine business.
I want to feel that when I'm answering them correctly, it's kind of like, aha, I got Karen.
Right. Is she going to step into your personal space and make you shut up over your answers?
Yeah. In fact, I'm going to give all of you, if you want a special, I'm going to give you a special discount code, Karen20, for 20% off WineSpeed.
Okay.
All your listeners as well.
Karen20.
Karen20.
Is that through Substack, or are you just doing it yourself?
I do it myself. Yes. I also do a Substack, but Substack is free and WineSpeed is a little bit more involved. So it's by subscription.
We'll see if we get the winemaker bump for you.
The winemaker bump?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll find out how many people do Karen20.
Yeah. Karen20. That'd be great. Right. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for everything you do. Thank you for educating people. Yeah. Thank you for drawing more attention to wine. Thank you for driving an interest in wine.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Tell us again this spring, your next program is
Share and Pair Sundays. And it begins, you can go on shareandpairsundays.com or comeoveroctober.com when we get later in the fall. Share and Pair Sundays begins the first Sunday in spring, which is March 23rd. And it ends May 25th, so right before summer. So it's a springtime campaign, 10 Sundays, shareandpairsundays.com.
And Karen's on Instagram.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you've somehow found our podcast but haven't discovered Karen MacNeil, how do people find you out in the social medias and realms?
I am at karenmacneil.com is my email, but on social media, I'm at Karen MacNeil Co. C-O. Okay. At Karen MacNeil Co. And that's our social media for everything, for Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn and
whatever else there is,
and
whether you want to use it or not.
And if you don't have a copy of the Wine Bible, why don't you have a copy of the Wine Bible?
Yeah.
If you're listening to this show, because you could fact check us.
Yeah, tell us where we're wrong. Get a copy of the Wine Bible.
I would say I hope Karen listens to our show sometime, but maybe I don't want to listen to it.
We'll just see if we can pass the quiz first before we qualify.
Right, exactly. You got the quiz wrong this week, Sam. You're not on the show this week.
Not on the show.
Thanks, Karen. We really appreciate it. Thanks for coming to dinner with us last night and hanging out with us this morning.
My pleasure. You guys are great.
We'll look forward to seeing you a little bit later today. You guys got any things you want to talk about before?
Oh, there's so much. I don't know. Well, it's Otto Tet season.
Valentine's Day
at the Tasting House with Ollie Kai and Chef Fiorella.
Which it was great that she came over the other day because
you guys tweaked the menu and some wines and stuff
a little bit because
Phil came in and overruled everything anyway or something.
It was good that he was there. And some things that we thought would work weren't quite working. And so we made some changes on wines and food, which is cool. So we got it completely dialed in.
And to book it, go onto our website and visit the Tasting House, and it's like making a reservation on Talk or Open Table or something. Yeah. You book your seat in 5 o'clock, 8 o'clock. 20 seats or so per seating.
2 seating, 6 courses, all paired with wines.
Yeah,
different wines, fun wines. Some just out of large formats.
Cool.
Yeah, we're going to have a good time.
I'm sitting at the 5 o'clock, so we'll see what happens.
I'll be looking forward to pouring your wine, Sam.
And I am continuing Tuesdays at the Tank. And so
Tuesdays at the Tank, right?
Tuesdays
the Think Tank.
At the Tasting Tank.
Tuesday Think Tank.
At the Tank.
Well, I kind of like, I just came up with the Tuesday Think Tank industry.
Will make you think at the Tank.
Yeah, think at the Tank.
So this is my way to try to help educate our local hospitality and
if you don't know, Bart has one of the most unique tasting rooms on the planet. It's actually a 5,000 gallon,
14,000 gallon redwood wine tank era
that was spared.
Yeah, spared 1890s era. It's pretty cool.
Wow. Sounds fabulous.
Yeah. A little hard to hang art in though.
Right around.
Theater in the round.
And when you stand in the center and you talk, you get this.
Is there like an echo point?
Echo point.
Cool.
Yeah.
Echo.
You'll have to come over sometime.
All right.
All right, everybody.
Maybe
Thanks for listening.